Several hours later, the water level of the Great Flood stabilized, and a yacht began sailing through the city. This yacht belonged to none other than Su Chen. Yu asked him if it wasn't a bad idea to wear this clothing while being outside. He replied that nothing was going to happen, since even if she didn't wear it, no one would be able to do anything to her. Yu was the one driving the yacht and was wearing a bunny dress. With a worried look, she asked Su Chen if he had ever been to the Science and Technology University. Su Chen was sitting behind her, with one leg crossed over the other knee. He had one hand resting on the seat and was holding a glass of wine with the other. He began to look at her and remained silent, smiling. Several seconds later, he brought the glass of wine closer to him, stared at her intently with a serious gaze, and told her that he had come to the university to see a brother but didn't know if he had survived. While with one hand she was holding the yacht's steering wheel, she placed the other hand under her chest, started looking at Su Chen, and while blushing, asked him not to worry because people with good luck have their own destiny. The yacht was moving at a high speed, cutting through the waves. Several minutes later, Yu started looking to the side and informed him that they had arrived at the University of Science and Technology. What used to be the University of Science and Technology was now a fortress, which was flooded with water from the flood. The entrance was blocked by two giant wooden doors. Their yacht approached the entrance, and at that moment, Su Chen turned his head to the side and with a murderous look, he realized that something bad was about to happen. His suspicions were correct, as someone who was watching the door peeked out, drew a rifle, and started shooting at the yacht. But luckily, Su Chen reacted in time. He approached Yu, put his hand over her head, and stood in front of her. The bullets began to hit him in the yacht. He turned his head towards the man who was shooting and remained silent. The man guarding the door stared at Su Chen and asked him who he was and what he was doing here. While Su Chen's eyes were shining, he began to stare at the man and remembered that this was the Science and Technology University, the same place where the mutated Rat King had emerged in his past life. He stepped forward on the yacht, put his hands in his pockets, and calmly explained to the man that they were here to join the evolution base. He also asked if he could open the door and let them in. The man simply started looking at Su Chen and remained silent, deep in thought. While holding the rifle with one hand, he rested the other on the wood. Upon closer inspection, he noticed there was a bunny girl on the yacht. He stuck his tongue out and told her that he would let her in if she stayed with him tonight. But he wasn't willing to let him in, so he asked him to go back where he came from. At that moment, Yu brought out a plate with delicious food. She closed her eyes and with a smile, asked the man to open the door for the sake of this stewed pork. Upon seeing this, the man panicked, placed his hand on the wood, and with a surprised look thought that the dish was indeed stewed pork. Underneath the man, there was another man named Lu Tao. Without hesitation, the man began pointing downwards, and with a look full of intrigue, he ordered Lu Tao to quickly open the door as it had been a long time since he had seen any meat. Lu Tao was somewhat surprised. He started looking at him with a confused look and accepted his order without complaining. The large wooden door of the university began to open. Seeing this, Yu returned to the steering wheel of the yacht and started driving inside. Once they reached the interior, the man who was guarding the door came down and ordered them to stop the boat and give him the stewed pig. After saying this, he asked Lu Tao to take them inside. He wanted to eat the stewed pork all by himself. While Yu's eyes were shining, she started looking at the man and couldn't help but smile. On the other hand, with a serious look, Su Chen simply remained silent. The reality was that the stewed pork dish was nothing more than a monster's hand. The man grabbed the hand with both hands, and while drooling, he thought it smelled incredible. Out of love for this delicious stewed pork, he decided to let them in. He also added that he would have to send that guy to the laboratory at another time. Lu Tao took Su Chen and Yu and decided to show them the way. Both of them started following him silently. In front of them there were two dying men sitting with their backs against the wall. There was a starving man lying on the floor, and a girl who was wearing a cape. While Lu Tao was sweating, he turned his head back and with a sincere look he explained to them that since they were all going to live in the base from now on, it was important to support each other. He also added that the ground floor was for the elderly, children, and other untouchables. He decided to take them upstairs to find a clean room. Su Chen, who had his hands in his pants pockets, and Yu simply listened to Lu Tao without interrupting. At that moment, the girl bumped into Lu Tao and fell to the ground. Upon seeing this, he turned his body towards the girl, started looking at her with an aggressive gaze, and asked her what was wrong and if she couldn't walk. Yu approached the girl, picked her up in her arms, placed one hand behind her back and the other on top of her arms. She began looking at her and realized that she was too hungry and had no energy left. She asked the girl where her family was. The girl's stomach began to growl. She put her hands on her belly, closed her eyes, clenched her teeth tightly and started screaming in pain. She explained to Do-in-yu that her family had gone in search of food and had not yet returned. Upon hearing this, Do-in-yu took out a bag of bread from her pocket, started approaching it towards the girl and told her that she could take it. The girl started to sweat, opened one eye, began to look at the bread and her mouth watered. But despite this, she didn't accept it because if she ate the bread, then her little rabbit sister would also go hungry. Su-chen, who was standing behind them, reached out to them and with a calm look asked the girl not to worry because it was impossible for her rabbit sister to go hungry. Upon hearing this, Do-in-yu couldn't help but start looking at the girl and begin to blush. The girl, who was starving, started looking at Su-chen and told him that he was lying, and also asked him what kind of person never goes hungry. Do-in-yu, who was holding the girl in her arms, began to sweat and with a worried look thought that if she didn't eat soon, she would die of hunger. Su-chen started looking at the ground and couldn't help but start smiling. He extended his hands forward, making a hot pot appear. He told her that she could question his character, but not his strength. In a matter of seconds, he took out a hot pot and several plates full of food and placed them on top of a wooden box. After doing this, he reached down to the ground, started looking at the girl, and told her that if Do-in-yu was his woman, then she would not go hungry. Upon hearing this, Do-in-yu was somewhat surprised. She began to look to the side and couldn't help but wonder what was happening. Lu Tao, who was standing behind Su-chen, was shocked. He started looking at the food with a confused expression and couldn't help but wonder where this hot pot had come from. Upon seeing so much food, the girl was also shocked. She told Su-chen that she also wanted to be his woman. Upon hearing this, Do-in-yu was somewhat surprised. She started looking to the side and couldn't help but wonder what was happening. She became jealous. She gave the piece of bread to the girl and explained to her that children don't say silly things. She asked her to simply eat quickly. The girl, who hadn't eaten in days, started eating the piece of bread and couldn't help but start crying and feeling like she was in heaven. Upon smelling the food, several men approached them. They couldn't believe that someone was cooking and eating here. Upon hearing their voices, Su-chen turned his body back and with a surprised look began to wonder who they were. 3 armed men began to approach them. The man with black hair drew a dagger and started showing it to the others. The man with dreadlocks kicked the wooden barrel hard. He ordered the others to get out of here, calling them an untouchable gang. He also asked them if they didn't know that hiding food was against the rules. The man who wore an eye patch was the leader. He began to approach them and explained that all materials had to be delivered first and then exchanged for contribution points. All the untouchables who were nearby started moving away from them and couldn't help but tremble in fear. He began to stare at Su-chen and remembered that nobody had exchanged food in the last few days, so he asked them who was the person breaking the rules. The 2 men simply remained silent. Upon seeing the men, the girl who was holding onto a piece of bread stood behind Do-in-yu, closed her eyes, and told her that she was scared. Do-in-yu, who was sitting on the floor, placed her hand in front of her and with a calm look, asked the girl not to worry because she would take care of making sure they behaved well. After saying this, she began to look at Su-chen. He turned his head towards her and with a serious look, nodded. Upon seeing what had appeared in front of them, their leader couldn't help but be shocked and wonder what was happening. Do-in-yu stood up, reached out to the side, started looking at the men, and asked if they weren't hungry after talking for so long. At that moment, Su-chen took some food out of the system's inventory which began to appear near her hand. She explained to them that she had prepared these things for them. With a killer look, she asked them to enjoy the food. On top of the wooden box, 4 plates with meat appeared. Seeing that there was a lot of meat, the 3 men started approaching like crazy and thought it smelled really good. They asked the untouchables to stay behind since all this food belonged to them. They began to drool. For them this was like heaven itself. They took the meat and started eating like they had never done before. For them this food was delicious, and the familiar feeling made tears well up in their eyes. Their leader began to stare fixedly at Do-in-yu, started pointing at her with his finger, and while he had food in his mouth, began to smile. He called her a good girl and decided to punish her tonight. But as for Su-chen, who had broken the rules, he was going to be punished more severely. Do-in-yu crossed her arms, started looking at the men and remained silent. Su-chen, who had both hands in his pants pockets, became somewhat confused. He looked at the men with a surprised look and couldn't help but wonder how the man was going to punish him. With a penetrating gaze, their leader gave the order to his subordinates to bring them out. Upon hearing his command, his men brought out 2 men who were bound with chains. They had so much strength that 2 men were not enough. They began to approach Su-chen, who simply started staring at their leader and remained silent. The punishment was a life or death confrontation with these two men. Either he killed them or they would kill him. He turned his head towards them, and as a drop of sweat was falling from his cheek, he looked more closely and saw that these two men were very familiar. He began to question if they were not the same two brothers from the Great Flood. The girl who was eating a piece of bread and hiding behind Duen's leg peeked out to see who these two men were. When looking more closely, she saw that they were the older brother and the second brother. Upon realizing that they were about to engage in a fight to death, she couldn't help but panic and start crying. She tried to intervene, but Duenyu stopped her, placed her hand on her head, and with a confused look asked her if those two were her brothers. The girl began to cry even more and tried to go help them, but Duenyu grabbed her by the waist with both arms. The girl started reaching out her hand towards them, called the men bad guys, and ordered them to release her brothers. She also asked Su Chen not to go there as there was something wrong with them. The man with dreadlocks who was eating meat like a pig told the girl that her brothers had ruined the mission and couldn't obtain contribution points as compensation, so for this reason they had been sentenced to death. Their leader, who was also eating like a pig, started smiling and told her that he was capturing them in order to have fun with them. He took a chicken thigh, took a bite, and started staring at Su Chen. He didn't expect them to actually know each other. For him, this was even more interesting. He decided that if he lost the duel, then he would let the little sister join her brothers. He planned to throw the girl into the water and feed her to the water ghost. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.